The Gray Vein ballroom held 200 candles and 200 guests, and every one of them was watching. The orchestra had been playing for 11 minutes. Philippa Vane, now the Duchess of Gray Vein, had counted, and her husband's hand was warm at her waist, and the waltz was going perfectly. And then Sebastian Aldren leaned in, close enough that she could feel the words before she heard them. His voice was quiet, deliberate, and entirely certain of itself. He said he expected obedience in this house. He said it watching her face, not the room, waiting for something she could not yet name. Philippa felt the words land in her chest, like a key turned in the wrong lock. She had been prepared for this marriage. She had prepared for 3 months. She had prepared for negotiation, for management, for the careful architecture of a shared life built on mutual convenience. But not for this, not here, not with 200 people watching her expression and the orchestra in full voice, and his eyes on her face, as though the answer to something important depended entirely on what she did next. She took 1 step back. It was a precise step, deliberate, executed in perfect time with the music, so that anyone watching might have thought it was choreography. She stood at arm's length from him in the middle of the Gray Vein ballroom floor, and she said clearly, without heat, in a voice that carried to the nearest 4 guests without any particular effort, that she did not. The orchestra continued. The nearest guests went very still. Then Philippa stepped back into the waltz. She placed her hand in his, settled her arm at his shoulder, and resumed the dance. The gesture was entirely hers, an offer, not a concession. Sebastian, after a single moment in which something moved across his face too quickly for her to read it, followed her lead. They completed the waltz. The music did not stop. The county watched, fascinated, and would discuss very little else for the remainder of the season. Sebastian led her through the figure with perfect technical accuracy. He did not speak again, but Philippa noticed she was already cataloging, that he did not reach for her when she stepped back. He waited. He let the choice be hers entirely, and when she returned, something in his bearing shifted in a way she could not immediately categorize. Not relief, not victory. Something quieter than either. Lady Dorothea Marsh, standing near the second pillar with a glass of champagne and an expression of studied concern, watched the whole of it and said something to the woman beside her behind her fan. The supper that followed was formal and long. Philippa sat at Sebastian's right and spoke with the precision of a woman who has been trained since childhood to manage a dinner table. Sebastian spoke with the focused attention of a man who is listening to everything and saying very little. They were, by any external measure, a perfectly composed ducal couple. Philippa ate almost nothing. She noted that Sebastian ate almost nothing either, though she could not have said why she noticed. After supper came the assembly rooms and the card tables and the long, slow dispersal of guests into the autumn night. Philippa shook hands and accepted congratulations with a warm smile that cost her nothing, because she had been practicing it since she was 16. Sebastian stood at her left and said all the correct things. Once, when the Viscount Hartley made a remark that was almost a jest about obedient wives, Sebastian looked at the man with an expression so precisely empty of amusement that the Viscount found himself talking about hunting within 4 seconds. Philippa registered this. She did not remark upon it. They retired to separate rooms. The household had been arranged this way by mutual, unspoken agreement in the weeks before the wedding, and no one had seen fit to question it. Philippa's room was the south-facing chamber with the large writing desk and the view of the kitchen garden. She sat at the desk for a long time without lighting more than 1 candle. She catalogued what she had. A man who had said the worst possible thing in the worst possible setting, publicly on their wedding night, in front of witnesses. A man who had, immediately afterward, followed her lead without protest. A man whose estate books, which she had not yet read but fully intended to, were reported by her solicitor to be exceptionally well managed. A man about whom Lady Dorothea had told her, with the careful gentleness of a concerned friend, that he was his father made over, cold, exacting. A man who had already broken one woman and would break another given sufficient time. She thought about the step back. She thought about his face when she said she did not. She had expected anger. She had prepared for anger, had her response ready, had calculated the social geometry of the moment, had known exactly how to hold her ground in front of 200 witnesses. What she had not prepared for was the expression that crossed his face in that half-second before she resumed the waltz. She had not prepared for it because she could not name it. And Philippa Aldren, she corrected herself, with a small internal wince, had not encountered many things she could not name. She left the candle burning and did not sleep until nearly 4. In the south wing, Sebastian sat in the chair by the window and looked at the garden he could not see in the dark. The rain had started around midnight, light and persistent, tapping at the glass with no particular urgency. He had said it. He had planned to say it, had constructed the moment in the days before the wedding with the careful deliberateness of a man who had learned, at considerable personal cost, that he could not trust his own instincts about the people closest to him. He had needed to know, before the marriage settled into its patterns, whether she would perform, whether she would smile and agree and be whatever the room required her to be, and save the truth for some later, private moment when it would cost him more than he could afford to pay. He had needed to know, and now he knew, she did not clearly and without performance, in front of 200 guests, with the music still playing. And he had absolutely no idea what to do with it. He had spent 18 months with Cecilia not knowing. 18 months of careful happiness, of a woman who laughed at the right moments and agreed with the right degree of warmth and never once gave him reason to suspect that the entire architecture of their engagement was a performance sustained for reasons he did not understand. Until 3 weeks before the wedding, when she left for a cavalry officer and a life in the north, and he was left with the discovery that he had been, for a year and a half, entirely wrong about someone he believed he knew. He had not told anyone the full account of it. His solicitor knew the legal facts. His man of business knew the practical consequences. No one knew what it had done to his confidence in his own perception. He had told himself the obedience test was pragmatic. He had told himself it was reasonable. He sat in the dark with the rain against the glass and catalogued, with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered, the evidence that it was not. He had said the worst possible thing to his wife on their wedding night, in front of her family and his entire county, and she had handled it with more composure and more dignity than he deserved. And he had not known, since the moment she placed her hand back in his, how to begin to address what he had done. He did not sleep either. Week 2 brought the solicitor, a mild-mannered man named Featherstone who had managed the Greyvane legal affairs for 11 years and had learned, in that time, to ask very few questions of the Duke. Sebastian called him to the study on a Tuesday morning and gave his instructions without explanation. He wanted a household agreement drawn up, formal, witnessed, legally binding, giving the Duchess co-signature authority on all estate charitable expenditures. Every disbursement, every endowment, every arrangement for tenant relief or school funding or parish support. He wanted it done within the week. Featherstone wrote it down and asked for no explanation, because he had learned not to. Philippa discovered this not from Sebastian, but from Featherstone himself, who mentioned it in passing 3 days later when she came to him with a routine question about the household accounts. He referred to the new agreement as though she already knew about it, and when her expression told him she did not, he went slightly pink and offered to explain the full terms. She listened. She thanked him. She gave no indication of what she thought. She did not raise it with Sebastian that evening or the evening after. They dined together with the careful courtesy of two people who have agreed, without negotiating the terms, to be civilized. The conversation was intelligent and occasionally interesting, and entirely defended on both sides. But that second evening, after dinner, Philippa went to the estate ledger room, a long, low-ceilinged room off the east corridor that smelled of old paper and beeswax, and she pulled the first volume from the shelf. It was dated 40 years prior. She sat down at the table, turned to the first page, and began to read. She came back to the ledger room every morning for the following week, before the household was fully awake and the day had assembled its requirements around her. She read with the systematic attention her father had taught her. The Earl of Stornwick had believed, with cheerful conviction, that a woman who could not read a balance sheet was at the mercy of every man she would ever employ. And what she found in the Grayvane accounts was not what she had expected. The charitable disbursements were not listed under Sebastian's name. They were not listed under anyone's name. They appeared as line items: tenant relief, harvest supplement, school fees for the Merritt children, medical costs for the Hollis family, entered with complete accuracy and claimed by no signature. They went back 12 years, beginning when Sebastian was 21 and had just inherited, and they were methodical in the way that things are methodical when they have become habit rather than performance. There was no record of announcement, no correspondence indicating that anyone had been told of the support, no evidence that Sebastian had ever mentioned it to anyone at all. Philippa sat with the third volume open in front of her and looked at the entries for the winter of 1847, when 3 tenant families had been quietly supplemented through a failed harvest that would otherwise have meant eviction, and she thought about the man she had constructed from Dorothea's description. She did not go to Sebastian with this. She was not ready to revise her evidence. She was only ready to add to it. Meanwhile, on a Thursday morning that Philippa spent in the ledger room, Sebastian's man of business, a practical Scotsman named Cairns, who reported facts without editorializing, mentioned to Sebastian, without any particular intention, that the Duchess had been in correspondence with a girls' school in Edinburgh. He had seen the letters on her desk when he came to ask about the household coal account. The school was called Marchmont Academy, and from what Cairns had gathered, the Duchess was discussing the endowment of a mathematics chair, funded from her own settlement income, in memory of her father. Sebastian said nothing in response to this. He turned back to the drainage survey on his desk. But for the remainder of that morning, he found himself reading the same paragraph 4 times without retaining it. Neither of them raised what they had discovered. They continued their careful, witty, defended cohabitation, occupying the house in shifts, Philippa claiming the drawing room and the ledger room, Sebastian claiming the study and the library, until the 3rd week of October, when Lady Dorothea arrived for tea. She came with 2 other women from the county, which was deliberate. Dorothea never did anything in company that was not deliberate. And she arranged herself in the best chair in the drawing room with the ease of a woman who has always known which chair is best. The conversation was light and warm and entirely managed. Dorothea asked about the estate with the careful interest of someone who already knows the answers. She admired the drawing room. She inquired about Philippa's plans for the winter season. And then, with the timing of a woman who has been planning the sentence for a week, she said it. "I do think it must be particular for a man of your husband's temperament," Dorothea said, addressing the room generally, but watching Philippa's face with the precision of a surgeon. "His requirements are so very specific. One wonders whether your own considerable independence presents a certain difficulty for him." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Philippa opened her mouth. From the corner, where he had been sitting with a book for the past 40 minutes in a manner that had suggested to everyone present that he was not listening, Sebastian set the book down. He did not raise his voice. He did not adjust his posture in the chair or alter the calm, focused expression that was his default in company. "My wife's requirements," Sebastian said, "are the ones that govern this house. I find them entirely reasonable." He looked at Dorothea with the courteous attention of a man delivering a weather report. "You might find the village assembly more comfortable this evening. I believe they have dancing." Dorothea left within 20 minutes, with perfect grace and a smile that did not reach her eyes. The other guests stayed another half hour, and the conversation recovered itself with the resilience of county society. And when they had gone, Philippa and Sebastian were left in the drawing room with the tea things and the late afternoon light coming through the west windows. Philippa did not thank him. She was not ready for that. But that evening, without announcing it to anyone, she moved her writing desk from its position against the inner wall to the window that faced the kitchen garden. 6 weeks into the marriage, on a morning when the kitchen garden was heavy with late autumn produce and the air had the particular cold clarity of October, Philippa arrived with her housekeeper, Mrs. Trent, to oversee the harvest inventory. Sebastian arrived from the opposite path with cairns for the same purpose. They regarded each other across a row of winter cabbages with the mutual composure of two people who have agreed not to be surprised by anything. The staff, reading the situation with the collective intelligence of people who have been watching a marriage from the inside for 6 weeks, found urgent business elsewhere within 4 minutes. Sebastian and Philippa stood in the kitchen garden alone. "What do you actually want from this marriage?" Sebastian asked. He said it without preamble, without softening, in the direct manner of a man who has been turning the question over for weeks and has finally decided to ask it aloud. Philippa looked at him. She had prepared, over the course of 6 weeks, for a number of conversations. She had not prepared for this one delivered this plainly, and the unprepared version of Philippa Aldren answered honestly. "A partner," she said. "Not a resident. Someone who is actually present in the decisions, not decorative at the margins of them." She paused. "I have watched what the other version looks like. I will not live it." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. A crow moved through the bare apple tree at the garden's edge. "I believed I wanted something different," he said. "I believed I had constructed a very clear idea of what I needed from a marriage, and it did not look like this." He stopped, started again. "I am no longer certain it was the right idea." It was not a declaration. It was not an apology. It was the first thing either of them had said to the other that was not defended in some way, and they both recognized it as such. They walked back to the house along the uneven path between the garden wall and the kitchen yard. The stones were irregular, the ground soft from recent rain. Sebastian offered his arm, practically, without ceremony, because the path required it. Philippa took it. They walked in silence for 2 minutes, and neither of them released the other's arm when they reached the door. The thunderstorm arrived in early evening 3 days later, when the sky had gone the color of pewter and the wind had been rising since noon. Philippa was in the drawing room with a letter she was not writing when she heard the front door. Nora was 12 years old and soaked entirely through. She stood on the front step with her hair in strings against her face and a carpet bag that had clearly been packed in a hurry. And she announced, to the housekeeper who opened the door, and to Philippa, who appeared behind her, and to Sebastian, who came into the hall from the study at the sound of the commotion, that she had run away from her finishing school in Bath because they were teaching her to be small. "They told me," Nora said, with the precise fury of a child who has been holding a grievance for weeks, "that a girl who knows too much mathematics frightens the gentleman. I told Miss Ashford that I did not intend to spend my life managing the feelings of frightened gentlemen, and she wrote to the trustees, and the trustees wrote to the Duke, and I have come here instead." She looked at Sebastian with the direct assessment of a child who has survived the loss of both parents and has no patience left for pretense. Sebastian said nothing. He turned and went upstairs. He came back with his own coat, a heavy wool thing from the hall stand, and put it around Nora's shoulders without comment. He looked at Mrs. Trent and told her to prepare the East Wing room and bring hot food. He told Nora that she might stay as long as she liked, and that he would write to Miss Ashford in the morning. "And the trustees?" Nora asked. Sebastian answered her plainly. "I am the trustee." Nora appeared to consider this. Then she nodded, as though a point had been satisfactorily settled, and allowed Mrs. Trent to lead her upstairs. Philippa stood in the doorway to the hall and watched him do all of this. There was no performance in it, no awareness of being observed, no management of how it appeared. He simply did the thing that was needed, in the order it needed to be done. And the coat was his own coat, and the instruction to Mrs. Trent was given in the same focused, practical tone he used for drainage surveys and harvest accounts. Philippa went back to the drawing room and sat with her unwritten letter for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. An hour later, when Nora had been installed in the East Wing with warm clothes and a supper tray and the particular satisfaction of a child who has executed a plan successfully, Philippa found herself in the corridor outside the East Wing room. The door was slightly open. She could hear Nora's breathing, already settled toward sleep. Sebastian was already there. He was leaning against the wall beside the door with his eyes closed, and there was still a wet leaf caught in his hair from carrying Nora's bag in from the rain. Philippa reached up without thinking and took the leaf out. It was a small, ordinary action, the kind of thing done without deliberation, and she did not realize she had done it until he opened his eyes and found her hand 6 inches from his face. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Philippa stepped back. Sebastian straightened from the wall. They went downstairs by separate routes to their respective ends of the house, and neither of them mentioned it. Dorothea, having failed to dislodge the marriage through a drawing room maneuver, tried a different instrument. She circulated the story of Cecilia at the November County Assembly, carefully, in the manner of a woman sharing a concern rather than a piece of gossip, with the embellishments that made the difference between a sad story and a damning one. In Dorothea's version, Sebastian had not lost Cecilia to another man. He had driven her away through a coldness so systematic that she had chosen flight over the alternative. There was a suggestion of cruelty in the version, nothing specific enough to be challenged, but specific enough to be felt. Philippa heard it from 2 separate sources before she left the assembly. She came home through the cold November night and went directly to the study. Sebastian was at his desk. He looked up when she came in, and something in her expression told him what had happened before she spoke. Dorothea's account of Cecilia, Philippa said. I want to know whether it is true. It is not Dorothea's version, Sebastian said. Then what is your version? He was quiet for a moment. His pen was still in his hand, and he set it down with the particular care of someone who needs to be doing something with their hands. I am not prepared to discuss it, he said. I understand that. Philippa's voice was even. But I will continue making decisions based on the information available to me. At present, the information available to me is Dorothea's account. Dorothea's account is not accurate. Then accurate information would be useful. Sebastian stood up. He moved to the window, not toward her, away from her. And Philippa registered this as something that would matter later. You arrived at this marriage, he said, with your principles arranged like a fortification, every position prepared in advance. I have watched you defend each one with considerable precision. He paused. I find myself wondering which of them are yours and which of them you borrowed. He knew, the moment the last word left his mouth, that he had gone past the point of wit into something he could not take back. He could see it in the stillness that came over Philippa's face, not hurt exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has just revised their assessment of a situation. She left the room. The door did not slam. That was, somehow, worse. 3 days of glacial courtesy followed. Meals were attended. Household business was conducted. The minimum necessary words were spoken with perfect politeness, which was a kind of violence of its own. Nora ate every meal in pointed, volcanic silence, looking from one of them to the other, with the frank assessment of a child who has decided that adults are, as a category, profoundly disappointing. On the third evening, she pushed her soup around her bowl for 5 minutes, and then put her spoon down and said, to no one in particular, that she had run away from one house where people would not say what they meant, and she had not expected to find the same problem at Grey Vane. Sebastian told her, gently, that it was not her concern. Nora gave him a look that suggested she disagreed. On the 4th morning, both their breakfast plates arrived with a small folded note beside them. Philippa's read, You are both being very stupid. Sebastian's, when he unfolded it in the study, read exactly the same thing. He sat with it for a moment. Then he put it in his desk drawer, because it seemed like something worth keeping. That evening, Philippa went to the study without planning to. She had been in the library, and then she was in the corridor, and then the study door was in front of her. She opened it. Sebastian was already there. He was standing at the window with his back to the room, which was, she had come to understand, where he went when he needed to say something he had not yet found the words for. Neither of them acknowledged that their arrival in the same room at the same time had not been accidental. Cecilia left 3 weeks before our wedding, Sebastian said. He said it to the window, to the dark garden beyond the glass. She left for a man she had been corresponding with for most of our engagement. I had not known. I had believed for 18 months that she was happy, that we were, that I understood what was between us. He stopped, started again. When I discovered it, what I discovered was not only that she had left. It was that I had been entirely wrong for 1.5 years about everything I believed I was seeing. I had been watching a performance and calling it a person. Philippa did not move. She stood near the door and listened. The line on the dance floor, Sebastian said. I expect obedience. I said it deliberately. I planned it. I needed to know, before the marriage became something that could not be undone, whether you would agree, whether you would smile and comply and save the truth for later? He turned around. He looked at her directly, which she understood now was difficult for him when the feeling was real. I needed to know if you would perform. You did exactly what I hoped. You stepped back and you said no, and you came back to the dance on your own terms, and I have not known since that night how to tell you that this is what I was asking for. That it was wrong to ask for it that way. That you deserved to know what I was doing. He paused. I should have told you. I am telling you now. The fire had burned low. Outside the window, the garden was dark and cold. Philippa crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk, not because she was tired, but because she needed to be still for what she was about to say. My sister married 4 years ago, she said. His name was Hartwell. He told her he loved her, and he meant it, I believe. But what he meant by love was a woman who reflected him back to himself without distortion. She was quick and funny, and she had opinions about everything. And within 2 years of the marriage, she had learned to be quiet. Philippa looked at her hands. She is quiet now in a way that was not there before. When I visit her, she asks me about my opinions and then watches my face while I speak. And I think she is remembering what it felt like to have them. She looked up. I arrived at this marriage with Dorothea's account of you and my sister's silence. And I built a man from those 2 things, and I have been fighting him for 6 weeks. He is not you. I have known for some time that he is not you. I did not know what to do with that. Sebastian sat down, not at his desk, in the other chair, the one that faced the fire. Dorothea, he said. She told me you were your father's copy. Cold, exacting. That Cecilia left because she could not endure it. Philippa paused. I believed her because I trusted her, and because I was frightened, and because it was easier to arrive armed than to arrive open. And now? Now I know that the anonymous entries in the harvest ledgers go back 12 years, Philippa said. And that you gave Nora your coat, and that you said in front of a drawing room full of people that my requirements govern this house. She met his eyes. I have been wrong about you. I am not performing contrition about it. I am simply telling you that I know. Neither of them apologized. There was nothing exactly to apologize for. They had both done the thing they did for reasons that made sense from the inside. And the reasons had been wrong, and they both knew it now. What passed between them was not forgiveness so much as recognition. 2 people finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in the low firelight of a late October study and finding the view less terrible than expected. They sat in the study for a long time without speaking, and the fire burned down, and when they finally left it, they left together. Neither slept. Philippa went to the library and sat with a copy of Thucydides that had been her father's, running her thumb along the spine without opening it. Sebastian went back to the study and sat at his desk without working. The house was entirely quiet around them, the particular deep quiet of a country house at 5 in the morning, when even the kitchen fires have not yet been lit. At 6, Philippa came out of the library. Sebastian came out of the study. They stopped in the corridor between the 2 rooms, 4 feet apart, in the gray early light. He said her name. Not my lady, not duchess. Not the careful formal address they had been using for 6 weeks. Philippa. Just that, her name, spoken in the quiet of the corridor, as though he had been carrying it for some time and had only now found the right moment to set it down. She crossed the corridor and kissed him. Once, without hesitation, with the settled certainty of a woman who has made a decision and will not perform uncertainty about it. His hand came to her face, not pulling her toward him, just there present. And the kiss was brief and entirely serious. And when she stepped back, she looked at him with an expression that said, plainly, that she knew what she had done and intended to stand by it. Sebastian looked at her for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved in a way she had not seen before. "Good morning," he said. She answered him quietly. "Good morning." The 6 weeks that followed were not a truce. Truces are temporary, and this was something else, a beginning, tentative and real and occasionally very loud. They worked from the study together, which required the addition of a second desk positioned at the window. They argued about the tenant's drainage proposal for 3 days before reaching a solution that incorporated Philippa's financing structure and Sebastian's engineering assessment, which neither of them could have arrived at alone. They disagreed about Nora's curriculum, with a vigor that Nora herself found deeply satisfying, particularly when the disagreement resulted in the dismissal of the geography tutor, who had told her that women did not require an understanding of cartography. Sebastian replaced him with a retired naval officer who had mapped 3 Pacific islands and had no opinions about what women required. Nora, for her part, ate her meals in a state of visible satisfaction and occasionally looked between the two of them with the expression of someone whose plan had worked out. In December, Sebastian attended the county winter dinner and presented Philippa to the assembled company as co-manager of the Gray Vein charitable concerns. He listed the current projects with the focused brevity of a man reporting facts: the Tenant Relief Fund, the Harvest Supplement accounts, the endowment of the Marchmont Academy Mathematics Chair in memory of the late Earl of Stornwick. Philippa's name was on each of them. He said so clearly, in a room full of people who had watched the wedding waltz and drawn their conclusions, and the room adjusted its conclusions accordingly. Dorothea was present. She had come with the Viscount Hartley and positioned herself near the fireplace with the strategic instinct of a woman who intends to be visible. When Sebastian finished speaking, she offered a remark, something light and pointed about the novelty of such arrangements. Philippa looked at her. It was a pleasant look, unhurried, entirely without malice. She said nothing. She simply held Dorothea's gaze for a moment with the calm attention of a woman who no longer has any use for the conversation. And then she turned back to Sebastian and asked him a question about the drainage survey that required his full attention. Dorothea did not make another remark. The winter assembly came on the last Friday of December, and the Gray Vein ballroom was dressed for it, different from the wedding night, the candles placed lower, the winter flowers white and green against the dark wood paneling. The same orchestra, the same county, in different clothes, with 6 months of accumulated observation to bring to the evening. When the music began, Sebastian offered Philippa his hand. She took it. The dance started with her lead. She set the first measure, established the tempo, and he followed with the ease of a man who has spent 6 weeks learning that following is not diminishment. And then, somewhere in the middle section of the waltz, something shifted without announcement. The lead passed between them, not surrendered, not taken, but shared. The adjustment happening in the small, physical language of 2 people who have learned to read each other. Neither directing, both moving. The dance becoming, in its middle section, genuinely mutual. From the mezzanine, Nora watched with her chin in her hands and her elbows on the railing. She was wearing a new dress, deep blue wool, chosen by herself, with no ribbon trim and no finishing school suggestions about what was appropriate. She watched the dance until it ended. And when it ended, she looked satisfied in the complete, uncomplicated way of someone whose assessment of a situation has been confirmed. The study the following morning was in the pleasant disorder of a room that is being actively used. 2 desks, positioned side by side at the window. His the larger one, stacked with estate surveys and correspondence. Hers the narrower one she had moved from the south room, covered in account books and the Edinburgh letters and the draft endowment papers for the mathematics chair. The evidence of a shared working life was visible in the way papers had migrated between the two desks, in the ink stains on the shared blotter, in the copy of Thucydides that had moved from the library and now sat at the corner of Sebastian's desk with a page marked. Philippa came into the study at 7:30 with her second cup of tea and found Sebastian already at his desk, which was usual now. She sat down at hers. She pulled the drainage correspondence toward her and began reading. Then she noticed the page. It was on the corner of her desk. A single sheet of writing paper, folded once, in Sebastian's handwriting. Not a letter. Not a formal note with salutation or signature. Just one line, copied out in the clear, careful hand he used for things he wanted to get right. She recognized it before she had finished reading it. It was a line from Sappho. Not the famous fragment, but one of the smaller ones. The ones her father had quoted to her when she was young, sitting in his study in Stornwick with the afternoon light on the bookshelves and the smell of old paper around them. Her father had translated it for her when she was 9, and she had carried it since. She who is beautiful to look upon, but she who is also good will also therefore be beautiful. But Sebastian had not copied it in translation. He had written it in the original Greek. He knew she would recognize it. He knew she would know that he knew she would recognize it. He had written it in Greek because she was her father's daughter, and because it was the kind of thing that should be said in the language it was written in, and because this was, of all the things he might have offered her, the one that said precisely what he meant. Philippa sat with the page for a moment. Then she looked up. Sebastian was writing at his desk, apparently absorbed in the drainage survey, and he did not look at her. But the set of his shoulders had the particular quality of someone who is very carefully not looking at something. "You know Greek," Philippa said. "My tutor was thorough," Sebastian said, still not looking up. "You know which line my father used to quote." "Cairns mentioned your father's library," Sebastian said. "I wrote to the Stornwick estate agent about the book collection. The catalog was detailed." Philippa looked at the page again. Then she put it in the drawer of her desk, the small drawer where she kept things she intended to keep, and turned back to the drainage correspondence. "The eastern culvert proposal is wrong," she said. "The gradient calculation assumes a dry spring. We need a contingency." "I know," Sebastian said. "I've been waiting for you to notice. You could have said something. I was interested to see how long it would take." 3 minutes, Philippa said. 40 seconds, Sebastian said. You were reading from the bottom of the page. Outside the study window, the winter garden was bare and gray and entirely still. Inside, the fire was going, and both desks were full, and Nora's footsteps could be heard overhead in the schoolroom where the naval officer was, at this moment, explaining the principles of triangulation to a girl who had been told she did not need them. The house had the sound of a place that is being lived in, not managed, not performed, but lived in by people who have decided to be exactly where they are. Philippa uncapped her pen and began making notes on the drainage survey. Sebastian, across the 2 desks, did the same. The morning light moved across the papers between them, and neither of them looked up. And the study held them both without effort, which was the whole point and had been, perhaps, from the beginning,